So, yeah, as Elisa said in the introduction, I do have a background in art, but I don't have a background in weaving. And when I applied for this show and was pitching the idea for this show to the museum and simultaneously applying for an individual artist grant to the Community Foundation for this project, I wasn't a weaver at all. And so what you're seeing, it was just a half-baked idea of something that I wanted to learn about and something that I wanted to try. And because I wanted it to be hyper-local in that all the materials would be coming from our community, I thought it could be an interesting community-based project. So I pitched this as something that I want to try out, and fortunately I got 2 yeses, which was some funding from the Juneau Community Foundation, so thanks to them, and a yes from the museum for this show spot this month. So thanks to the museum for that opportunity as well. So once I got the yeses, then I had to start by finding some looms and then learning how to weave. So what you're witnessing here is kind of from 0 to where we are today in the span of about 10 months. And so the purpose of this project, as you're looking at it, isn't to make super fine highbrow art. It was to learn about a tradition of fiber reuse that has dated back centuries or longer than that, as long as people have been creating fabrics out of fibers, be it cotton or wool or whatever. It was precious in the beginning. We had to reuse every last scrap. And then with clothing and things, we all know about, seeing rag rugs or original patchwork quilts that were made from flour sacks and all of these things about reusing things. But then over time, as things change with clothes becoming cheaper, things becoming more easy come, easy go in terms of what we have around our houses and what we wear and what we consume, more and more of it just gets thrown away. And one of the things that nudged me toward this project was a comment that someone made in an email group that I was in. We were talking about solid waste in Juneau and how it's fortunate that we have industrial compost in our community. That's a really cool thing. And someone was asking about whether you can compost clothing or not, which is a big kind of iffy, yes and no, basically, is the answer to that. It's a little bit complicated depending on what things are sewn with. It might be a cotton t-shirt, but the threads might not compost and things like that. And that got me kind of thinking, well, how do you get rid of clothing and what does that look like? And as was said in my introduction, I've spent a lot of time in Africa, and I know that a lot of our clothing gets shipped overseas to secondary goods markets over there. Even living there, I bought a lot of secondhand clothes in the markets that had been shipped to the African continent, either from North America or from Europe as well. And that's an industry with its own story and its own costs and benefits to the communities there, both as a business but also as interrupting supplies of being able to have a market for local cotton there if they're able to import things cheaply. So that's complicated in its own way, in addition to, of course, the fuels to ship things over and all of that. So I spoke to people at the thrift stores in town. I know for myself and also when talking to friends and family how people end up with a bag of clothes in their car that they've been trying to donate for weeks and catch that window where they're open and accepting donations, but maybe they're not accepting women's clothing or curtains today. It's hard to find homes for stuff. And I know a lot of us, myself included, feel really bad about throwing things away. And so I was really looking for a way to interrupt that cycle, however small that is. And then coming at it through an art background and liking crafty stuff, liking problems to solve and liking processes, I thought this would be a really fun thing to check out. So that's the origin story here. And so I got going. The first loom that I got was a tapestry loom. It's not the loom that's in the corner. I have another floor loom set up in my studio. It's as a 5-foot weaving width, and it stands about 6 feet tall. It's a Swedish loom that is a tapestry loom, which means that the work threads are going up and down, and the frames move from side to side this way, which is perpendicular to the way that this rug floor loom is set up in the corner, and I'll demonstrate that in detail a bit later on. But the first loom was, also in the spirit of this show of using stuff that already exists, not purchasing anything new, came from the classroom of Ulla Peterson at the high school. Ulla had the loom set up in her classroom for several years and wasn't using it at the time, so my husband arranged that lending deal. And then later on I learned that the loom belonged to Ulla's mom's next door neighbor out on Fritz Cove Road. So it's a loom that's been in town for a long time. And then once I got that loom set up with the help of a lot of YouTubes and the Reddit weaving community and some online forums and books and lots of help, I got this loom off of Craigslist down south. And this was another kind of interesting puzzle to get it up here. I've been watching Craigslist ads for looms in the town where my parents live and also in the town where my mother-in-law lives, and I found this one close to my mother-in-law's house. Called up my husband and said, if I can get this guy from Craigslist to drop off a loom at your mom's house, do you think you could get her to give him some cash for me, and then can we ship it up? So that's what happened. So with the help of some third parties, we got this guy shipped up here on the AML and set up in the studio. And so that was the equipment that I was using, and I got started. So these small pieces up here, I started small when I was learning how to use the looms. So that's why it's just they're like coaster or pop holder size, because I wanted to start small when I was just getting the mechanics of the loom set up and adjusted. I replaced some parts and had to do a lot of cleaning and troubleshooting to get things up and running, both for the loom and just for my own knowledge of how it all works. So that was why I started small and then gradually got bigger. So in terms of materials, what I used was so in weaving, the two main directions are called the warp and the weft. The warp is the cord that's usually smaller and it is forming the structure. And the warp is what is attached to the loom already. It usually comes in like a cone or a spool, and then it's wound onto the loom and then held at great tension on the loom. And the weft is the material that makes up really the bulk of the weaving, and that's the one that you're working back and forth across to make the design. So in all of these pieces, the warp thread is new, it's cotton, so that part was not reused, but all of the weft material, all of the filler material is all from clothing, starting at my house and my closet and my kids and my husband and all of our stuff, and then friends and family. And then I asked around the Juneau Facebook group, hey, does anyone have anything that that I could potentially use for this? The response was overwhelming, and the comment thread on this, quickly delved into, I'm just imagining this person's front yard littered with trash bags. Oh no, I wonder if she bit off more than she could chew, because so many people were like, yes, it is so hard to get clothing and textiles. And so people were happy to chip in all kinds of stuff. So that is where the materials came from. And then I started weaving. So with that background, I wanted to share a couple things with you, partly show what some of the materials look like and some of the tools that I used to prepare them and what that process was like, because I had a lot of fun playing with vintage, low-tech tools in doing this project, and also in the reading that I did to learn how to do this. One of the things that I found was, there are modern rag rug books still being published today. It's a craft that's been in continuous use for hundreds of years. So there's current publications on it, and there's also older publications on it. And the old ones are hilarious. And I'm going to read some some excerpts here because I really thought that some of this is pretty funny, and I hope you do too. And then we'll go from there, and after that we'll do a demonstration on the loom, and then if people want to experiment a little with how some of the tools are, you can do that as well. So you know, here I am with this enthusiasm for rag rugs and this project, and you know, do some reuse, and it's going to be awesome. This book, the Shuttlecraft Book of American Hand Weaving. This is a photocopy of our copy that's from our local library. This was originally published in the 1920s by Mary McEwen, who was kind of a famous home economist at the time. This is from the 1950s reprint, which is the copy that we have, but the text is the same. So this is chapter 18 about rug making from Mary McEwen in the 1920s. She writes in her chapter about rug making, "In the old day when all fabrics were hand woven and made to last a long time, when a suit of clothes might be passed by will from grandfather to grandson, every scrap of cloth was valuable. Even rags still had much solid substance. In those days, the rag rug was a reasonable feature of domestic economy, but in our times, most of the fabrics in general use are light and sleazy, and when worn out, have no value left in them. To cut such stuff into strips, sew them together, and weave them into rugs is largely a waste of time. This is, to be sure, a suitable occupation for the inmates of state hospitals and other institutions, where time has no value and is merely something to be gotten rid of as painlessly as possible. But an expert hand weaver with a good loom should be able to find something better to do." So she goes on about some factors that would maybe improve rag rugs. And then she starts in, "Though the project is not a very interesting or profitable one, suppose a modern hand weaver is seized by an overpowering impulse to weave rag rugs. Just how should the distressing thing be done?" And then she goes on to give some tips. I loved this because, you know, I think when, you know, things that are old come around and are new again, and in the enthusiasm for discovering something old, finding someone writing 100 years ago that this is a terrible idea, it really tickled me. And especially, you know, when we think about clothing today and how cheap and flimsy most clothes are today, we've been talking about fast fashion a little bit with this show, and how clothing today is manufactured very cheaply with the idea that you'll wear it for a season and then you'll throw it out and buy a new one. And to think of, you know, clothes today being very flimsy, but someone writing 100 years ago saying, "Oh, our clothes these days are just too flimsy and not worth saving," was very interesting to me. But now, of course, the problem is upside down. The problem is different. The problem is not that things are precious and need to be saved, but it's more that our planet is precious and we need to be throwing away a lot less stuff, starting with consuming less stuff and purchasing less stuff, but also thinking in terms of landfill and where do things go when we're done with them. So another example, and this is a bit later, this is from the weaving journal Master Weaver in 1965. And this was another example of people who are like serious weavers writing about the plain rag rug. Rag rugs, especially as quilted bedspreads, originated in times when woven fabrics were so precious they had to be used to the last shred. Both techniques were entirely justified a century or two ago. They survived until now only in extremely poor countries, or through sheer habit, if not inertia. Rag rugs are economically obsolete, aesthetically questionable, and technically of very poor quality. But they're still being woven in huge quantities in certain countries. The economics are all wrong because a normal household does not provide enough leftovers and fabrics to produce a significant yardage of rag rugs. So, and they go on to say the texture is not satisfactory. The worst is that they are not practical, and they are hardly good enough for anything else. Still, as if for sentimental reasons some weavers persist in producing this type of fabric, they should at least improve the technique to make the rugs more durable. So this really echoes what Mary McEwen was writing 50 years before this, was that here's this thing that is really still quite a terrible idea, but if you're going to do it, at least do it well. So that was a couple of things that I enjoyed reading from the past. And so the hit and miss, which is the title of this show, is the name of a rag rug technique. And the hit and miss is like this rug, or like the one on the back wall, which is made of shorter pieces of weft all strung together. So the shorter pieces being cut from things that existed. So I see a lot of t-shirts in here, my kids' pajama pants, things that were not large, cut into pieces that are generally less than about half a yard, all strung together, and it makes this kind of hodgepodge. Hit and miss is what the look is called. And I liked hit and miss for the name of the show because it also is, it has this quality of like, maybe this is a good idea, maybe this is a terrible idea, and maybe this is a hit, maybe this is a miss. I don't know. Going back to the fact that I was not a weaver prior to this project, I was learning how to do it, and I also just wanted to explore the idea of textile reuse and whether or not it would be a good idea in this community. And so, is this going to be a hit or a miss? I didn't know when I was starting out. Honestly, I think the jury's still out. I don't know. But I'm going to read one more vintage publication about whether this is a hit or a miss. So we heard from two writers here that said this is terrible and a waste of time. But who would think this was a hit but the people who were in the business of selling rug looms? So this is the original instruction book that came with this loom. I don't have an exact date, but I know that it was between the end of World War II and 1969 was the last year that these were manufactured. So it is from somewhere in there, I believe, about the 50s. And so the people who were selling rug looms, this was marketed specifically for rugs, for rag rugs, and in the instruction book it talks about how the loom works and how to dress the loom and prepare it for weaving, but the last chapter is managing the weaving business and how to start. As nearly everyone has a supply of old rags, worn out clothing, and other waste textile material, it is usually easy to obtain orders for custom weaving from your friends and neighbors as soon as you mention having ordered a loom. Custom weaving means working up your customers' rags into rugs, carpet, or other furnishings, charging a fixed price per yard for doing the work, and adding the cost of the work. Or you may do as many weavers do and quote a price high enough to include the work. And then it goes on to explain how you could put an ad in the newspaper, hang a sign on a tree, or in your window to say rugs and carpet weaving, or any place where it would get good trafficking. And it's got some names for your business. The following list contains several ideas that may be worked out in choosing a name for your weaving business: Associated Weavers, Clever Craft Studios, Home Craft Weavers, The Warp and the Weft, Ye Old Time Weavers, Colonial Rug Works, Jones Rug Shop, Economy Weaving Works, etc. And so here in opposition to this, we're saying this is a terrific idea. You can use your family's scraps and make a profitable business. So I thought that this was another great example of that hit and miss. Is this a good idea or not? Still from the past. So that was just some of what I learned while I was doing this. So I want to talk a little bit about the fabrics and how I did it, because part of my goal for this show was to demonstrate how I did this so that anyone else who's interested in replicating it could see what I used and how to do it. One of the things that I think is fun is the good old pot holder looms that I think many of us remember from childhood. when you buy the kit, it comes with some stretchy loops in the back, in the box, and those are, typically it's like manufacturing waste from socks, but if you have your own socks that are stretchy, and these are nylon, so they work pretty well. But you can just cut some slices as if, I don't know, like calamari rings or something. And then one slice of sock, and you've got a ring you can use for your sock weaving. So that would be one. But for the most part, for things like this with t-shirts, the tools I used were just a big piece of scissors, and also anyone who sews might recognize the good old seam ripper, which is a little hook that's very sharp, just in the little inset part right here, has a cutting blade where you can use that to destroy a sewn seam and get things down. Dismantle things to pieces. So an old t-shirt, one of the things that I quickly learned is that in cutting up t-shirt yarn, now when you go home and you look through your closet, you'll see that some t-shirts are sewn with a seam on the side, and some are manufactured without that side seam, so it's like one continuous tube of fabric. So for the ones that have a side seam, you end up taking it all down. Do you see the skeleton of a shirt here? So this is just what remains after cutting out the serged edges of a shirt. So here's the sleeve edge, there's the arm. So I did not weave with this serged edge. This is where the pieces of fabric that made the shirt come together and are sewn in the sewing machine. So I just started by dismantling things just down to the fabric itself without the sewn seams, and then cutting things into slices. And one thing about t-shirts that are knit, if you cut along, like basically horizontally to the way it's knit, parallel with those lines, if you pull it and stretch it tight a little bit, those edges roll in, and you don't see the inside. It kind of curls up. And then once you've done that with a t-shirt, you have kind of a nice cord that you could either weave with, or crochet, or knit with like a bulky or large needle, or macrame. So this is kind of a fun cord. The benefit to using a shirt that has no side seams is that if you start at the bottom with your scissors and cut, you can go around and around and around in one continuous spiral and get a nice big several yards piece of cord that doesn't have any joins or seams. Whereas this shirt that came from one that has side seams, I have dozens of pieces about this long, which I can still use. I just need to take the time to join them together. And the way I joined those together was by cutting a small slit in each end and then putting them together and pulling one through the other. And then it makes kind of a sturdy knot where they hold each other together, but it lies fairly flat and it doesn't require any sewing adjustments. So, cutting wise, I call these my weapons grade scissors. They're marvelous and kind of dangerous. The other cutter that I used is up here, and this is called a Fraser rug cutter. And this is a vintage one. There's the Fraser Rug Company still services these and makes replacement parts for them. So they're still in business. It is a lot like a pasta cutter. It has a guide where you choose kind of the width of the material that you want, and then once you feed it in there, it passes through a presser wheel, and the cutting wheel is underneath that has a blade, and then you just turn that crank and you get a nice strip. So that was another fun thing to use. And these were specifically designed and made for rug making. This cutter wheel is just a single cut, so it makes just one slice, but there are other ones. You can get them as many as 5
simultaneous, really thin cuts. There's another form of rag weaving where you have very thin strips, and then you pull through like a mesh with a hook, and that makes like kind of a fringy pile rug. And this type of rug cutter can be used to make those small strips as well. So when my scissors hand got tired, I could use those guys as well. And then sheets are fun because if you go along the side of the weaving, you just have to get started with it, and then you get a nice clean tear. This is dusty though. Makes a lot of lint in the studio, but it's also kind of fun. The last bit of textile reuse that I have on display in the case over there is unraveling. And that is taking a sweater or a hat or scarf or some kind of knit good and basically unknitting it back into the long piece of yarn that made it. And in doing this, much like the t-shirt and looking for the side seams, you kind of have to, you have to choose an article that is constructed in a way that you can unknit it. Some knit things, especially in fast fashion, are kind of assembled and sewn panels of knitting that have been cut and then serged together. And if you were to unravel something that was constructed in that way, you would end up with one piece of yarn for each width of the garment. Whereas something that, in this yellow sweater that's in the case over there that I was using for my demo, it's constructed out of knit pieces together that are joined with the same yarn, and the sides are finished. So even though I'm taking it apart with the front and the back, and each sleeve is one continuous piece that can be unraveled. And so the tool for that is a good old crochet hook to pick out the stitches to get started, and then once you get started, you have that satisfying zip, zip, zip of the stitches coming out. And then from there, you can rewind things. It helps to soak the yarn just briefly, not agitating it at all, but get it wet to rinse it out and then hang it, and then you can make your skeins of yarn. I paid $3 for this cashmere sweater at Value Village, and it had a ton of holes in it, so I knew that it was past what anyone would reasonably want to repair and wear, so I didn't feel bad about destroying it. But when you look at all of those piles of balls of cashmere yarn and think about how much that would cost at the yarn store, it's pretty thrifty in addition, so that's fun. So I'm going to check how we're doing on time. So would folks like to see how the loom works? Sure. Okay. I think there's a few, we can just kind of come around. Looms is that just the vocabulary words I had to learn was a huge list, but back here on the back beam is where the work threads are loaded on initially. So there's a big row of spikes down there. Each of those spikes holds one cone of work thread. So in this particular design, you could put 24 cones of thread, start at one end of the wheel, and turn the crank of the wheel to measure out 24 strands of yarn together onto one section. And until you have enough for your project, then go to the next section and then do that 19 more times to get all the way across the back beam. And then once all of your yarn is on the beam, then you come through and thread. So when you think about weaving, like on a potholder loom like that, if anyone's done that, you know you're going in and and out, up and down over each thread. But the purpose of the loom and of these frames is to do the work of separating the threads for you so that you don't have to go up and down. It's making that space automatically. So in the case of this simple rub loom, it just has 2 frames. And these are called heddles. Each heddle holds 1 strand. And so the threads are threaded through here in order, and the heddles stay in order on the frame. And in this case, for a plain bead, which is 1 thread, alternating 1 thread, so up and down, just 1 by 1, which is as simple a weave as you can do. It's every other thread, so the front frame and the back frame. I threaded this with alternating colors of yarn just because it makes it a little bit easier to see what's going on. And so once those are threaded through the petals, then they are threaded through this part right here. These are called dents or teeth. And this bar is called the beater, which does the work of packing things in there. And so this thread is coming through the frames, through here, and then is tied onto the cloth beam. And so as one weaves, we're filling in the warp this direction. Eventually I'll run out of space here, and so I'll release the break, which releases the tension on that back yarn, and then this crank, which also has like a ratchet and pawl system for a break, so it can be advanced, but it won't roll backwards, it will still hold the tension, and then everything will shift that way, and then I'll have more space again. So here are some, when I tied this on, I just kind of used some scrap fabric to show, I think these are all sweatshirts. But I'll do a couple rows so you can see. And the petals have chains connecting them to the frames, which means so this is looking up half of the threads up and half down. So I can put my work through there. The other petal, which then reverses that to the threads that were lower are about down. And then I can use my beater to pack that in. That's nice. So in the case of like these pieces, you can see that the color is coming from the work threads. And so I tied up the loom with all of these colors, and then the fabric that's making up the bulk of the work is a pair of jeans. So that's this dark blue that's coming through here. All of the stripes are just coming from the thread that's going this way, and it's the same for the piece that's right behind you on the other side. So this was another fast fashion joke. I don't know if anyone got it, but that rug is made out of Levi's 501s, and this is the Kirkland signature rug. The fabric's a little thinner. But those both use the same rainbow work, and then about half inch wide slices of jeans. So yeah, tapestry loom, which is the one where the work threads are vertical in front of you, and part of that is really for the ergonomics of it. It was a lot easier to sit and have the work in front of me while I was messing with it than on that loom where it's down in front of you. And so here, a lot of it was the same with going back and forth with different colors, but instead of going a row all the way across, I just kind of did partial rows to make the design that I wanted to make. For the texture. Yeah. Oh, Yeah, we can look at the back of this. So for the rugs that are like this, that were made on the rug loom, they're the same. You can flip it over and it looks the same on the front as it does on the back. But for this one, the back is hiding a lot. For where I switched colors and fabrics, I left a lot of those just kind of hanging free rather than finishing them.
So are the different colors connected? I mean, do you tie them together?
They're, where I started, it depends. So in some of them, I made a U-turn. When I was coming over here with this color and this way, and then they kind of cross and make a U-turn and then go back to where they were going. Or when I switched colors, I just overlapped a few rows and then left it hanging off the back on both sides. So that's why there's a lot of things just hanging off the back. So it's still, the warp threads are just holding everything in place, and they're just doubled over in those areas. So that's why it gives it a lot more.
Did you use a pattern for those or
No.
picture?
I looked through the camera roll on my phone for a Juneau Beach scene. People have asked me where this is, and I'm not 100% sure. So, yeah, I was kind of thinking down the channel. I thought it was kind of by Will Park is where I think I may have been moving on. Yeah, I had it in mind, and then I tacked some pictures to the wall of my studio that were in eyesight when I was leaving. I mean, the traditional way to do it would be to draw a grid and have that, at the exact same size, and have that behind the tapestry and work from that. But this whole thing was a little bit more freeform.
It's beautiful.
I thought it was glacier. So the interesting thing about this landscape is it kind of can turn inside out in your brain. When I started it, what I was thinking it was the view inside the ice cave, with the area on the bottom being the darker part underneath the ice and the blue ice coming down from the top. But as it was done, it flipped inside out in my head and became the sky and the mountain. And most people have viewed it that way. But if you kind of squint, you can envision it being the contours of the ice cave.
Especially with the colors and
Yeah. So if anyone is interested to try any of these things or see anything, or if there's any other questions, that's about all I have that I wanted to share.
I just have a comment. When you are accepted to be a solo artist here, you get not even really a whole year. And it just seems like this process is very slow, everything you have to go through. And were you working up to the very last second?
I was working up to the very last second,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
Yeah, there was, in terms of having about a year from start to finish, most of that year was taken up with just getting set up, learning how to use the loom, getting the loom set up and getting comfortable with it. And then, about halfway through, I kind of felt like I knew what I was doing and could go from there. But yeah, I was working up until the last day.
Yeah.
are you planning to continue, and do you have ideas for other projects you want to do?
Yeah, I will definitely continue weaving. Right now, I need to move my studio because I'm renting in the assembly building, which is being converted back into apartments. So my lease is up. So, especially last night at the show, I can't even count the number of people who tried to give me more materials to work with. And I could say I do plan to continue this and will continue accepting fabric, but after I get settled into a new workspace where I have where to put it. So, yeah, so things are kind of on pause for a moment for the show and for when I get moved and resettled, but I do plan to continue making this.
So Mary, you were not a weaver before you signed up for the show.
That's correct.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So I did have an undergraduate degree in art, and as a part of that I took one weaving class, and
we used a backstrap rigid heddle loom, which is a much smaller version of the rigid heddle is like one piece that does the work of both of the frames and the beater bar, so it's kind of a condensed version. So I had just a very rudimentary idea of weaving, but I had never used a floor loom. This project was more about, I guess, kind of proof of concept for me to see whether I could do this and what the process of using all local fabrics would be.
That's really admirable. You took that on.
Thank you.
Can you quantify the amount of clothes that you used in the project at all, like garbage bags?
It's hard to say. Well, in terms of an individual piece, the larger denim rug that's on the left there is 2 very large pairs of Levi jeans. So that's about 2 pairs of pants is one piece. This is like, it's tricky because a lot of it's kids' clothes that are really small, and then some are adult clothes that are bigger. But this is a couple of dozen t-shirts and pants. In here, there's a lot of sheets, and there are pieces from a couple pairs of underpants as well. But you'll never know.
Did you talk about your button picture already?
Oh, I didn't talk about the button
yeah.
picture. Thank you for reminding me.
Yeah.
So, another form of old-timey textile use is keeping buttons. And I know I'm not alone in saying whenever I was going through my mom's desk and found a cookie tin and opened it up, and then there were buttons and sewing supplies in it instead of cookies. A lot of people's moms and grandmas had a button jar, button tin, where all the buttons that were cut off old discarded clothing were kept. And so when I told my mom about this project and about reusing clothing, textiles, and looking back to some of the older traditions of reusing stuff, she hauls out a big banker's box and pulls out her button jar and her mom's button jar and some fruitcake tins from her grandma's, and we had thousands of buttons. And we worked together over the summer. I was at her house, and first we just started spreading them all out on the table, and most of them still had thread inside because they'd been cut off things. And I kept some of the ones in the case back there where Grandma had just, cut the strip off the shirt to keep all the buttons together before she tossed it. So we sorted them all out, and we were trying to think of something that would be fun to do. And so I chose, the picture there is from a photograph of my grandmother, Mary John. And I chose her because it was, mostly her buttons that we were using, and also wanting us to be, trying to keep the localness in this show. She and my grandma lived in Douglas for a long time. And so I thought, well, maybe there will be someone in the crowd who took piano lessons from her 50 years ago. I don't know. So that was why I chose her image. But she and I look a lot alike, so more than one person kind of like, wait, is that you? So that was not intentional, but I did that by using a pixelated photograph and looking at the value. So not the color, but how light or dark something is what gives the optical illusion of that face coming into focus from across the room.
I can't imagine how you could have worked on it. I mean, I can see the design from here, but up close.
Yeah. One tool that helped with that is taking a picture and putting the picture into black and white. Because once you remove the color, I think people who quilt or do other types of design probably know this trick too. Once you take away the color, you'll see which ones don't belong based on their value, how dark or light they are. So that was one of the tools that I helped to keep me on track from that. But I had it all printed out, and my mom helped me. We worked together to sort all the sizes and colors and types. It was a fun project also because it was, for my mom, she'd pick up a button and say, oh, this was Mom's Sunday coat, or things like that. So that added an extra layer of fun to the project as well.
I love the fact that there's color in it, in addition to the black and the white.
Mhm.
Yeah.
like how the show, you know, it's just embedded history, whether it's your family history or the history of the medium, you know, the rugs. It's fun.
Yeah, I really wanted the process to be more about the finished piece more than about the finished piece, and about kind of the learning process and the history. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, thank you all for coming.